Oh, what dark and necromantic age do we live in, where games thought dead may rise again and rattle about in packages in my mail. And what dark hand is behind this action? None but Games Workshop. How dare they send me things I've ordered? But don't worry about any of that, for in these lands we are well equipped to handle any necromancy that comes in boxes, for I am equipped with an unboxing knife, and that means it's time for another cracking unboxing. But what exactly is the flavour of the necromancy of the day? Why, it's Necromunda, and it's in here. Let's take care of that straight off. Don't you betray me, Weather. I see you up there. Right, where do we start? Oh, it feels good to be unboxing again, my friends. Oh, what a great age. Here we go. What? Get out here. What? Wrong box, sorry. Here, now this has to be Necromunda. Disregard that other box. I told you this was a dark age. Games are popping up from the fertile soil of the dead all the time. Looks a little more promising, eh? What's this? Christmas card. Wait a minute. Yes, I've been sitting on this box for a little while, but never you mind that. Gang War. Gang supplement. Sold separately, eh? We'll talk about that later. Let's have a look. Necromunda is the tabletop skirmish wargame of anarchy and violence. Yes. Well, it was. I wonder if it still is. You've got to prove yourself in the pudding, my game. What's this? A pin! I know where that's going. Straight onto my beachcombing hat. There we go. Every adventuring dwarf has a beachcombing hat. Here we go, the thing. Oh. See this in greater detail. Well, that doesn't seem to be a bad cover to me at all. It's not exactly as striking as of old, but the new cover, this one, does have many advantages over this one, eh? We'll worry about that later. Now, I've got a good feeling about this, and I haven't had a good feeling about a Games Workshop thing for many a moon. Let's get in there. All right, brace yourselves. This could all go downhill at any moment. Oh, yep. Not too bad. Pile of sprues. I quite like it when they're brightly coloured. 10,000 sprues. Mohawks. Women. That's what I'm all about. We wouldn't get very far in Games Workshop without 10,000 sprues. These look very familiar. They might not be, though. What? Well, look at this. That's a step up. Nice, not folded, big, glossy tactics card, eh? Oh, no. What's wrong with a sheet? Oh, nice. Customised Necromunda bases. What a good idea. These dice here seem to indicate death, injury, and something else. And I suppose this is pinned, accurate, and scatter, and I don't know, that's just a guess. It might be. We'll find out later. What's this? Necromunda Underhive rulebook. Far thicker than the Gang War book. I wonder what that's all about. You couldn't include this Games Workshop. There's plenty of room in there, mate. I'm looking forward to seeing some of the updates to the fiction. Looks like there's a fair bit of it in here. Belladonna. Look at that hair. No sign of Mad Donna yet, though. Specifically only covers Goliath and Escher. We'll see how that pans out. I bet it pans into extra spending. What's this? Oh, it's a range ruler, is it? A clear range ruler. Hey, empty baggies. Good work, Games Workshop. And just as well, because there looks like there is a ton of tokens here to worry about. Just one sheet of tokens, that's good. We don't like too many of those. And this looks like modular dungeon tiles. Just on the surface of it, this looks like a big improvement over a Warhammer quest, you know. Right, unboxed, but we shan't leave it at that, shall we? No, sir. We are going to take a closer look at all of this stuff. So I'm off to take some picky wickies and make it all nice and clear for you, independent of this treacherous weather, and we'll be back shortly. Right, time for the traditional viewing of the cover art, or box art, if you prefer. Now, I tell you this, I think that this is a better cover than this. Because of course I'm not going to be able to talk about the cover of Necromunda Underhive without harping on about the old one, and I wouldn't even if I could. Now don't get me wrong about this, mind you, I really like Jeff Taylor's image painted for the 1995 edition of Necromunda, but I dispute its worth as a cover piece. Cover art does its most important work at first sight, and it's amazing how deeply the imagination can be enticed in a single glance. Some covers like to draw in the imagination with a bit of subtlety and mystique, using things like symbolism, perspective and scale, colour and space, unusual subject matter, and Patrick Stewart.
But he is a 5-day march from here.
Games Workshop doesn't go in for that sort of thing very often, though, do they? No, they like a nice battle scene, appropriate since they make battle games, well, mostly. Battle covers are fine though, they're very useful because they can very directly and efficiently demonstrate both the imaginative world of the game and its mechanics. They can give you some idea, a sense of how the game plays. That said, I feel that old Necromunda does very poorly in these areas. Now, it's true that there is something arresting about the absurdity and chaos of the image, but I don't think it really shows you Necromunda. Not in a way that's useful as a point of first contact on a cover, anyway. If you didn't already know, you'd never figure out this is a two-player tactical skirmish game. There are certainly no tactics on display, are there? And I don't see much evidence of who is supposed to be on whose side, or even that there are sides, as everyone is shooting everywhere in aimless frenzy and panic. When I first saw this cover, I assumed that these heavy dudes were an elite unit of whatever army this picture was supposed to represent. For Underhive, though, the two most distinctly oppositional factions were wisely selected, the Herculean Goliath and the Amazonian Escher. Look at how clear all this is. Two sides, skirmishing with distinct combat styles and everything. There they are, arranged on the cover in order to adumbrate the flavour of the game and their personalities as well. Look at those Goliath warriors all clustered together in the middle, punching forward in a show of brute force. Great lumps heaving about close combat weapons in order to highlight, no doubt, their great advantages of size and strength. We can't expect the Escher girls to go toe-to-toe with that, can we? Of course not, and they won't. It's not their way. From the little glimpse the cover gives us, their weaponry and tactics seem to be more sophisticated than the blunt, direct methods of the Goliath. Why, they're even making use of cover, a crucial Necromunda concept. In fact, it looks like they're falling back from the Goliath advance, but they're not in flight. I reckon they're drawing their opponents in, and our point of view puts us right in there with them, privy to the conspiracy. Look at this face. I know from experience. That is the expression of someone about to do some serious raining on someone's parade. Let me tell you about girls in the 80s, man. This is how it was. You'd be out in the street, and then some chicks with names like Slasher and Toxine would be coming the other way. You'd say something witty like,
Happy Halloween, ladies. I have something to say. It's better to burn out than to fade away.
Then bam, plasma grenade. I never went back to that part of town. Well, not very often, anyway. The downside to this cover is that the art itself is of a much lower standard than of old. That's not to say that the uncredited artist isn't any good. They clearly are. However, I see in this image a tale of falling standards, shrinking budgets, and killer deadlines. A lot of classic cover artist tricks are used. And that's not a bad thing, strictly speaking. Many classic covers are full of time-saving trickery. But that said, this cover really gives up a lot, and I think it prevents the work from reaching the level of old Necromunda, which itself is not even close to the upper tier of Games Workshop covers. You know the ones I mean. I have returned many times over the years to old Necromunda to admire its richness and detail in spite of its weird action. I am not confident that I will be able to say the same for the image of the new era, but time will tell. Also, there's no halflings. Right, I'm putting a stop to this cover talk. We'll never get into the box at this rate, and this talk of falling standards is so grim, I think we need to look at something where standards have actually risen. Namely, this thing. Necromunda doesn't go in for any of this grainy, grayscale, monochrome pamphleture. No, sir. What we have instead of that lot is a nice, large, glossy, double-sided sheet. This is miles ahead of the instruction sheets for Warhammer Quest Silver Tower or Assassinorum Execution Land or whatever it was. Disaster. In any case, it's certainly the largest single improvement I've seen Games Workshop make for many years. That makes this such a rare prize, I think I'm going to put it on my secret shelf with all my real treasures. Yo-ho, to the accessories we go, because, according to international law, every game these days has to have miles of cards and tokens and markers and... Well, Necromunda doesn't exactly have miles and miles, but, it's got a few. There are thankfully only two kinds of cards mandated by this game. Tactics cards, for you to spring on your enemy, and little character sheets, some of which are filled in with characters from the basic version of the game. And there's tokens and markers, too. When I looked these up, they include ready, out of ammo, broken, docked away markers, and the well-named burn marker, I believe?
Better to burn out.
No, wait, they're pitfall craters. Well, never mind that, then. Oh, I do have to confess a certain degree of cynicism in seeing a skirmish game of the old guard reappear with all of these cards and tokens and bits and bobs and... Now, I'm not trying to say that this is inherently bad, certainly not. This sort of thing definitely does lead to new and interesting rules now and then. But I can't help but wonder if the hand of design isn't moved by, say, marketing concerns, rather than strictly what makes for the best game. Oh, I wasn't always so sceptical in these matters, when then along came Fantasy Flight's appalling edition of Wolfrup. Look at this mess. This was a role-playing game, I remind you. Action deck. Blech. Well, at least Necromunda Underhive isn't as hideous a mutant as that. Besides, I'm sure I'm not the only person to have a bit of a cynical response to some of the more hybridized elements of this boxed version of Necromunda, especially since, at first glance, it looks a lot like a board game. I don't think it would be shocking to say that board games, being so popular, have influenced the way that other games present themselves in recent years. I think it's possible that the form taken by Necromunda here is meant to make the miniature skirmish genre a little more familiar and approachable to all these new tabletop players before introducing them to real Necromunda, where things start getting a bit more involved, hobby-wise. The board pieces included in the game are a big part of this image. These tiles, I tell you, they're very polarizing. Well, I don't know what anyone else thinks, but they're certainly polarizing me. In one sense, I really like these tiles. I see tremendous potential in them on their own or in combination with other scenery. All the patterns and layouts that you can configure them into are very interesting and must certainly be more so when you make use of all the barriers and doors and what have you. Like the Necromunda scenery of old, this makes them very useful for other games, especially if you like to make up your own. This is the worst edition of Skeletor's Time Warp yet. But at the same time, I really don't like the way these boards look. Now, they're not too bad, ultimately, but I have many criticisms, and I'm going to share a couple of them here. These tiles are a product of the same digital compositing method we've seen previously in Silver Tower. That means the majority of the artwork is assembled from a palette of elements rather than being illustrated in whole as a complete image. I don't really have anything against this sort of artwork, strictly speaking, and I am indeed very fond of the likes of Clint Langley, who I think uses the technique very well. But I do think it carries some inherent problems, especially concerning game components. For example, I feel that miniatures painted by hand always seem to clash with digitally manipulated scenery in a way that they just don't with more traditional environmental art. Although I do believe that it can be done very well, the digital approach is very inviting, I think, to the kinds of shortcuts that just aren't available to an artist wielding a brush. As with Silver Tower, you'll have the uncanny experience of seeing the same elements appear multiple times, with only minimal effort spent in trying to hide the seams, so to speak. All the digital compositing gives everything an awkward sense of unbelonging. While there are some nice details, in particular, I like the occasional ganger who has run afoul of this luminous mould. That's great. But for every one of those, there's something else that undermines the whole thing and makes it look like, a hack job. unworthy of the company that previously furnished us with some of the best board artwork of all time. Rich in colour, clear in detail, and full of the implication of narrative and life, and enticing to the imagination in a way that Underhive's tiles just cannot aspire to. Now, these tiles aren't the worst example of this sort of thing, not by a long barrel, but they do come across as a little amateurish. You know, Games Workshop is a legendary company, and they say they're the best. We should be able to expect the best from them, especially since they've given us the best in the past. Well, maybe it's difficult to keep the best talent around when nobody gets to put their name on their work. I don't know. In any case, I remain disappointed in these tiles, but at least they aren't all equally poor. It's not obvious straight away, but the inside of the box is a board piece as well, secretly, and I think it's actually the best one. It isn't really up to much layout-wise, I suppose, but visually it's certainly the best. What I'm really getting at is the walls, which are covered in clear and well-considered detail. Oh, it looks like it could come from a whole other era, and maybe it did. I don't think it looks too out of place next to old Necromunda scenery. Alright, that's enough talk about board pieces and what have you. It's time we discuss the blandest and most colourless part of any Games Workshop production. The Sprues. Only joking, the Sprues are of course maximum interest to all who come before them. Well, they better be interesting, they take up enough room in the box. Miniatures are of course Games Workshop's main ticket, and I think what we see here on the Sprues meet expectations easily. They all seem to be up to a high standard of technical quality, and I'm always very impressed with how cleverly the miniatures are designed like this. All these parts, they've got to come together and fit the format of the sprue. It must be a nightmare. But whatever, I want to talk about the miniatures that all these bits turn into. I think they're all interesting in their own way, but this is the most interesting one, by a long shot. Now, I understand that many folk don't like this miniature, and you can tell why, right? As soon as you look at it, you can immediately see that it doesn't work. It's obvious. The whip has this really exotic motion and the character herself has almost no motion. These things don't go together, right? Well, steady now. I might be about to express an unpopular opinion. I think this miniature is great. I like the disconnect between motion and stillness. There's a beautiful unreality to the shape of the whip. The way it sweeps, snaps back, and then stops right where it meets this statuesque warrioress who is brimming with easy, casual violence. It's like something John Blanche would draw. You know the man. His work is, or it should be, the visual touchstone of Warhammer 40,000. And he might well have had a hand in this miniature, I don't know, so I couldn't tell you. But I can tell you where I've seen this exact whip move before. Right here, in John Howe's wonderful illumination of the hobbits in Mordor. Look at that figure in the foreground there, the orcish taskmaster. See how his whip sweeps and snaps back and stops? And he is certainly a figure of easy and casual violence, isn't he, eh? Someone who would snap back and turn on you at any moment for any reason. The Necromunda figure isn't quite as good as this, of course, and I don't think it quite captures Blanche or anything. But I think it looks pretty good. But that's just what I think based on the pictures and the sprue, and who knows, when I actually get around to building the thing, maybe it'll be me who snaps back and swings around like the capricious whips of all. Whoa! Oh my God! Well, that's the sprues done then, I suppose. Oh dear. Well, never mind that. It's time we take a look at the one and only book that comes with this set. The rule book. The Gang War supplement and several others are, of course, sold separately, and therefore don't count. There's a fair bit of artwork, and it's generally pretty good, I think, if a little bland here and there. The interesting thing is that it's almost entirely pictures of individuals. There is not one scene of gangers ganging together, as a gang, either fighting or in an impressive tableau of sorts. It's not a bad thing, strictly speaking. It's an interesting choice, I'll give it that. Highlights include Belladonna here, a clear tribute, I think, to the Amazonia Gothique by John Blanche. And this fellow here, Lobo Kerman, with his classic barbarian hero-esque posing. Now, I did say earlier that the houses of Escher and Goliath were distinctly oppositional, and that's true. But I'm sure you've spotted a powerful commonality that has been present between them since their inception in the 1990s. They both exploit the iconography of punk. Now, Necromunda has never augured a sincere representation of punk. Those are incredibly rare in media. However, old Necromunda, along with many things of its time, looted a lot of the old punk subculture's visual language in order to express themes of anti-authoritarianism, freedom, violence, social degeneration, cultural rebellion, all that sort of thing. And as you can see, new Necromunda's Escher and Goliath retain the visual connection to punk. But there is something going on in the text. All Goliaths need a steady supply of chems and stims to keep their massive bodies functioning and provide them with their impressive strength. It is a rare cocktail controlled by the House Masters and one that they use to keep their gangs and work clans in line. So much for all that punk stuff. It's an interesting shift in the background to suggest that the gangs are predominantly founded and controlled by House authorities. It's bizarre to me, anyway, to read about gangs fighting in the name of this house or that house, rather than fighting for survival, or weapons, or territory. I don't think it's strictly a bad change or anything. I'll give it this. It certainly makes the fact that the gangs are separated into all these culturally distinct types far less contrived than it was in old Necromunda. But at the same time, it pulls the focus up toward the hive and its internal politics and struggles and away from the anarchies of the Underhive. You know, the actual setting of the game. Or at least it was. I'm greatly disturbed by many passages within this book that suggest that the Underhive is to be abandoned as the primary setting of Necromunda. Like this one that implies fledgling gangs start here and go up, of all places. Oh, it's the wrong direction. Oh, I can't help but see a terrible missed opportunity here to enhance, truly enhance the wonderful setting that is the Underhive. My approach to doing so would be to abandon the usual model used by 40k stuff and even old Necromunda, and double-ditch the lordly position that it gives the reader looking down on the setting from on high. Instead, I would recommend deep immersion. Put us down there with our gangers. Limit the information given to what a ganger might know or might think. And all of the expected talk about the Imperium at large or the other spires of Necromunda or even the upper realms of this spire, Hive Primus, the main one, all of that should fade into the barest half-known fables, second-hand or even hundredth-hand lore. But don't spend too much time on that, and certainly don't make it the focus of any section. Pepper it in here and there as a way of showing how far removed from the high and the mighty the Underhive is. Furthermore, we should be rid of anything evoking the so-called High Gothic tongue. Zone Mortalis, Sector Mechanicus, get rid of it. Let us get a feel for Underhive lingo, gang speak, scum slang, the mutated language of the alienated. Put us behind their eyes. Let us want what they want and start to fear what they fear. A unique and focused and restricted viewpoint like this could make conceptions of the 40k setting at large into these monstrous and evocative imaginings. The kind of thing that we're always told that the 40k universe is supposed to be. At the same time, the Underhive setting could be in powerful focus, all of its salient details more brightly illuminated than ever, while at the same time its shadows are drawn just that much darker. Sadly, that chance has passed us by, I fear, and this book is ultimately pretty much the same old shower. The same terminology and the same tone, bent, like it always is these days, toward laboriously and constantly reinforcing that this game takes place in the precious 41st millennium. Frankly, that place is starting to seem smaller than ever. Alright, so I might have a couple of quibbles with the trajectory of the fiction or what have you, but I also do have very positive feelings about what I found in and on this box. Get out of my face. Hair. Be gone. Rats that look like men? There.